This happened over a decade ago in a small coastal town in eastern Canada, the kind of place people call sleepy because they want to believe nothing ever goes wrong there. I was 15 at the time, and my daily ritual included walking my 8-year-old brother home from his after-school program. Our route took us down a narrow service road that cut behind a row of houses. It was a local shortcut, hugged by dense trees with only a single flickering streetlight at the entrance. Beyond that, the road was a tunnel of pitch-black shadows. One evening, winter had arrived early. The air was biting, and the sun had already surrendered. It felt routine, boring even, as my brother rambled about his birthday presents with his shoes crunching on the frozen gravel. As we were walking, no more than halfway down the road, something hit me. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical pressure in my chest, that primal sixth sense that tells you you're no longer the apex predator in the room. I slowed down, my breath hitching, and glanced over my shoulder. A man was behind us. He wore a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, masking his eyes. I didn't recognize him, which in a town where everyone knows everyone was an immediate red flag. But what chilled me was his proximity. The road had been empty seconds ago. Now he was barely 15 paces back, perfectly syncing his stride to ours. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He just smiled. It wasn't a friendly greeting. It was a flat, predatory expression. He was measuring us, testing the distance. I didn't want my brother to panic, so I gripped his hand tight and whispered, "Don't look back, just run." We bolted. Immediately, the rhythm of the footsteps behind us changed. He wasn't walking anymore, he was sprinting. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought they might crack. I risked one look back and saw a flash of something in his hand, a long, dull shape that caught the faint moonlight. We reached our driveway in a blur of terror. I practically threw my brother up the steps, fumbled the key in the lock, and slammed the door shut, throwing the bolt just as my lungs began to scream. I sent my brother upstairs to hide. Then I stood there in the dark, my ears ringing in the suffocating silence. A shadow eclipsed in the front glass of the side window. He was standing there, just on the other side of the door. No knocking, no shouting, just a silent, heavy presence waiting to see if I'd open it. After 30 agonizing seconds, the shadow drifted away. I never saw him again. No police reports, no sightings. There was nothing. I told my parents we ran because we were late, and I never told my brother why my hands wouldn't stop shaking that night. People talk about intuition like it's a myth, but I know better. If I'd ignored that feeling for even 5 more seconds, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. 8 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s and living in a university town in central Germany, I shared a place with 2 roommates and worked early mornings at a bakery. This meant my schedule was the polar opposite of the rest of the world. While the city slept, I was wide awake and restless. Because of that, I developed a habit of taking walks deep into the night, usually well after midnight, just to burn off energy before trying to sleep. I wasn't particularly imposing, but I wasn't small either, and I had never had a single reason to feel unsafe. The town was famously quiet, almost boringly peaceful. It was early winter. The air was cool and dry, with a heavy dead silence. I left my apartment a little after 12:30 a.m. and headed toward the canal that sliced through the city center. I didn't wear headphones this time. I just walked, listening to the rhythmic echo of my own footsteps off the empty cobblestone streets. The first half hour was uneventful. I passed shuttered cafes, a ghost-like tram station, and a row of modern student housing before finally reaching the canal path. Near a pedestrian bridge, I noticed a lone figure standing near a bench, a man, maybe late 30s or early 40s. He wasn't sitting or pacing. He was just standing perfectly still, hands at his sides, staring intensely at the black water. I assumed he was drunk or lost in a dark thought, so I didn't give him much attention. I had crossed the bridge and continued into the older part of town, where monolithic government buildings and museums lined a broad, empty plaza. I looped around the square and started heading back the way I'd come. That's when I nearly collided with him. He appeared suddenly at the corner of a building, moving with such speed that I had to stop short to avoid a crash. I muttered an apology in German, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stepped back into the harsh streetlights and stared at the ground, then up at me, then away again. His expression was frantic, an unreadable mess, tense and distracted. I nodded awkwardly and kept moving. Something felt wrong immediately. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, but when I checked my reflection in a shop window a few seconds later, I saw him. He was right behind me. Not far, far too close. His pace matched mine with terrifying precision. When I slowed, he slowed. When I crossed the street, he did too. At the next intersection, I stopped and pretended to tie my shoe. He walked past me, stopped a few meters ahead, and began digging through a messenger bag slung across his chest. His movements were frantic, unfocused, and shallow. He barely looked inside the bag. Instead, his eyes kept flicking back toward me. It felt staged, like he was desperately buying time for the street to empty. The pedestrian signal had changed. I waited a beat, then crossed. He moved fast, cutting directly in front of me and turning sharply down a side street linked with dark office buildings. I exhaled, assuming the nightmare was over. I was dead wrong. The street ahead was darker, the lights spaced further apart. As I passed a row of reflective windows, I saw a blur of motion behind me. Someone was running. I turned just as he reached me. He stopped abruptly, less than an arm's length away. His eyes were wide, his breathing shallow and jagged. He kept glancing at my shoulders and my hands, like he was gauging exactly how hard I would fight back. One of his hands was clenched tightly around something small and dark. We stood there, frozen, in a horrific standoff. Finally, a delivery truck rumbled past at the far end of the street, its headlights sweeping over us like a searchlight. I felt my voice snap back and I yelled louder than I meant to. "What is your problem?" He didn't answer. I took a step back. He didn't follow. I took another, then another. When I finally turned and walked away, I expected to hear his footsteps charging behind me, but there was only silence. I looked back once and saw him crossing the street without hesitation, disappearing between the buildings like he'd never been there at all. I went straight home, checking my shadow every few seconds. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I never reported it because there was nothing concrete to report. No weapon shown, no physical attack, just a feeling, just predatory behavior. But even now, years later, I know how close that moment was to tipping into something irreversible. To the man near the canal, let's never meet again. This happened in late 2021 when I was 22 years old. At the time, I was living just outside Vancouver, Canada, staying in the basement suite of my partner's aunt's while finishing a semester of college online. The neighborhood was quiet. It was suburban and felt completely isolated by transit once the sun went down. One evening during winter break, I went into downtown Vancouver to finally meet an online friend I'd known for years. The meetup was great, but I completely lost track of time. By the time I checked the transit app, I realized I'd missed the last direct train home. The only route left involved a regional bus from a transit hub nearly 45 minutes away, followed by a pickup from my partner. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I arrived at the bus terminal. Most of the shops were dead, and only a few buses were still idling. A handful of drivers were standing together near the edge of the lot, talking over coffee. I walked over and asked which bus was headed towards Maple Ridge. One driver, an older man with thinning hair and a heavy weathered jacket, said it was his routine. He noticed I was shivering in the biting wind and suggested I wait inside the bus since it was already warmed up. I hesitated. Every instinct I had told me not to get on, but the cold was brutal and I didn't see a rational reason to say no. I ignored my gut. The bus was parked far from the terminal lights, swallowed almost completely by the shadows of the lot. As we walked over, he started peppering me with questions. Where I lived, who was I visiting, why a girl like me was out so late. I answered vaguely, the unease growing into a dull roar in my head. Inside the bus, only the dim front lights were on. I sat near the driver's seat, phone gripped in my hand. Instead of getting in the driver's seat to leave, he followed me inside, tossed his coffee cup, and began talking nonstop. He told me how this bus used to be a charter vehicle, how spacious it was in the back, and how there were storage compartments and cool features passengers never get to see. Twice, he suggested I walk to the back with him to take a look. I didn't move. My heart started thudding against my ribs. I texted my partner, "Something's wrong. Strange bus driver. Please call me right now." The driver stood in the aisle, partially blocking my path to the door, watching my phone screen every time it lit up. His eyes lingered way too long on my legs before flicking back to my face with a look that made my blood run cold. I felt trapped. When my phone finally rang, his demeanor shifted instantly. He stepped back, muttered something about grabbing another coffee, and exited the bus. The moment the door hissed shut, I tried to leave. It wouldn't open. He had locked it from the outside. Panic hit me like a physical blow. I was alone, trapped inside a dark, silent bus, parked in the shadows, and no one could see me. I stayed on the call, whispering to my partner what was happening. Through the window, I saw the driver pacing nearby. Each time he approached and saw me still on the phone, he'd turn away, only to come back minutes later and check the lock again. This happened 3 times. At one point, an older woman approached him outside and asked if his bus was going to Maple Ridge. He flat out told her no, even though I knew for a fact it was the route I needed. He was clearing the area. He was isolating me. With about 10 minutes until departure, something in me snapped. When he finally came back inside, I forced my voice to stay dead calm. I said I needed to use the restroom in the terminal. He insisted there was one on the bus. I lied again, saying I need snacks from the vending machines. He hesitated, a dark look crossing his face. Then he pretended the door button wasn't working. I looked him dead in the eye and told him if he didn't open it, I'd use the emergency hammer to take out the window. Suddenly, the door opened just fine. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back inside the terminal, crouched behind a closed kiosk, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. A few minutes later, I saw him enter the building, scanning the rows of seats like he was hunting for someone. I didn't move until my partner's cousin arrived. I reported the incident, but since he was a subcontractor, nothing ever came of it. No follow-up. Nothing. But I know this. If I hadn't threatened him to break the glass, this story would have ended in the back of that bus. To the man who locked me in, let's never meet again. When I was 17, my cousin and I would sometimes hang out at an old abandoned drive-in movie theater on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas. The screens had been torn down years ago, leaving nothing but a massive, cracked parking lot overgrown with waist-high weeds. At night, it was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy, and the only light came from a few flickering street lamps at the edge of the property. One Saturday night in early November, around 11 p.m., my cousin and I were parked near the far end, just talking and eating snacks in her car. She was 18, I was 17, and it was the last weekend before the chaos of school started again. The lot was completely empty, except for a rusted pickup truck parked far off the near entrance. After about an hour and a half, the truck left. The silence returned, but only for a moment. Then a dark minivan rolled in slowly, its headlights off. It stopped just a few paces away from us. That alone was enough to make my stomach tighten into a knot. Before I could voice my fear, the sliding door on the passenger side whooshed open. A man stepped out. He was at least 6'2", wearing a heavy hoodie with a ski mask pulled halfway up his face. At the same exact time, another man climbed out of the driver's side. He was carrying a crowbar. I froze, the air leaving my lungs. My cousin, paralyzed by panic, fumbled frantically to lock the doors. The man with the crowbar reached us first, grabbing the door handle and shaking it violently with force, while the other man leaned his entire weight on the roof of the car, effectively blocking my cousin's side. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears, and I knew we couldn't just sit there like prey. "Go!" I screamed. She slammed the car into gear and we bolted. She hit reverse so hard we narrowly avoided the man's feet as she spun the car out of the lot. That's when the situation escalated from a scare to a hunt. The minivan's engine roared to life, and they followed us out onto the narrow, winding road leading away from the theater. The lot was surrounded by dense black trees, meaning there were no houses, no witnesses, and nowhere to run. My cousin floored it, but I could see them in the rearview mirror, their headlights finally cutting on as they slowly gained on us. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, struggling to keep my voice from shattering. We're being chased. A dark van, two men with weapons. Please hurry. The operator was calm, telling us to head toward a well-lit area and to absolutely not stop for any reason. We took a series of frantic back roads, tires screaming on the pavement, and finally reached a gas station about 10 minutes later. The minivan never showed up under the lights, but just sitting there under the bright artificial glow of the pumps, I realized how close we'd been to a nightmare. My hands didn't stop shaking for the rest of the night. This happened when I was 16. In the winter of 2021, in a small town in western Oregon, the snow was unusually deep that year, turning the forest behind my house into a silent white tomb. There were no neighbors, no hikers, just the endless rows of trees and the rhythmic crunch of snow under my boots. I had been helping my cousin prepare for a school photography project and wanted to get some practice shots in the forest by myself. I brought my camera and tripod, planning to capture long exposure photos of the frozen landscape and the skeletal trees. My younger cousin offered to come along, but the cold was too much for her, and she headed back home at the last minute. I decided to take our 3-year-old Beagle instead. He was usually the friendliest dog in the world, a dog that never barked at anyone, and I didn't want to be completely alone in the woods. I stepped onto the snow-packed trail and wound deep into the forest, eventually setting up my camera near a small clearing where the light hit the frost perfectly. Everything seemed peaceful at first. I was lost in the work, experimenting with angles, crouching behind the snow-covered bushes, and snapping pictures of the intricate frost patterns. But then I noticed something in the corner of a shot, a shadow that didn't belong to any tree. I turned slowly, the blood draining from my face. About 50 feet away, partially hidden behind a cluster of evergreens, stood someone. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They were bundled in multiple layers of mismatched, filthy clothes and carrying a massive black duffel bag. Only their eyes were visible in the gray winter light. In one hand, they held a long, thin object that I couldn't quite identify, but it looked lethal. My Beagle froze. His ears perked up, his tail went as stiff as a board, and then he growled, a low, guttural warning I had never heard from him in his life. That was the moment I knew I was in danger. I tried to move back quietly, whispering for my dog to follow, but the figure took a step forward. Their movements were deliberate and silent. Then they spoke, their voice soft and completely flat. I don't care about dogs. I swallowed hard, the fear turning to ice in my chest. I grabbed my camera bag and started walking faster, coaxing my dog along, but the snow was deep, making every step a struggle, and I could hear the rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch of footsteps behind me. They were keeping pace. I didn't wait any longer. I ran. I reached a steep slope where the snow was soft and treacherous. I had a choice: stay on the main trail, climb toward the logging road, or drop into a snow-covered ravine. With no time to think, I grabbed my dog and jumped into the snowbank. It swallowed me up to my waist. I scrambled out, my lungs burning in the freezing air, snow clinging to my numb legs. When I finally reached a small clearing near the logging road, I looked back. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still at the tree line, scanning the area. They didn't call out. They didn't chase me into the open. They just watched. I didn't stop running until I reached the street outside my house. When I finally got inside, I was shaking uncontrollably. I haven't gone back into those woods since, and I hope I never do. Whatever was in that duffel bag, I'm glad I didn't find out.